I welcome Erich to the HKW Talks on the Anthropocene. Erich is professor at Bochum University, and he is professor for media technology and media philosophy. Welcome, Erich. Reading your books or your articles, I question myself in a kind of self-reflexive way, who is writing them, you or your computer?
Interesting questions. First of all, because what made you think like this about my text? That's the point.
I mean, because it seems that your notion of man and machine is a conceptualization where it becomes difficult to distinguish between the parts performed by the machine and by man.
I mean, that's an interesting and important question for me personally too. Maybe I start with this personal impression, because until about, I would say, 2002, I was still quite young, but I was obsessed by handwriting. And I had the difficult regime of diverse books, and I wrote by all my stuff by pen. Even I started all the notices I made for my dissertation. Everything was written with a pen, and then I started to write the Holy Channels, the book, in a huge.
May I make a short bracket there? I just had a talk with Alexander Kluge about sensibility of the fingers, which at the same time are, so to say, also the identity proof of people. And which, of course, Apple used when they developed the touch screen. So there are good reasons for handwriting.
And it was it's handwriting is a very good experience. As you see my finger now with the ink, I still do it today. But I had a quite difficult regime. I had a huge book like this, and with different sections. And I started to write the book, and the first version in the left part of the page, and so on and so on. And but after, I don't know, 50 or something pages, I was in the flow of writing, and suddenly there was no reason why I switched to the computer and started writing there with the computer. And after that, I never changed. So I'm still writing. I love handwriting, but as soon as I start to write a text now, I do it with the machine, and that's a completely different process of writing. That's clear, because I mean, you know it yourself. You can all the time go back and forth and rewrite everything, and you're always in this kind of repetition. It's not a deadly repetition, or should not be. It's a kind of productive repetition. And if you work by handwriting, I mean, this is really not possible. That's you are really in the linearity of writing.
That's true. But I'm still also handwriting. My experience is that since I'm not typing very well and make mistakes, which you easily can, of course, correct in the computer, but still I have the impression that my thinking and my writing is in a way connected, which it is not when I type. Because you have breaks. When you make the mistakes, the flow of thinking does not come.
That's very different for me, because I before I studied, I had an education for hotel management. So I learned fluently writing. So I can write without looking to
it's already part of your body.
Yeah, exactly. So I even just look at the monitor, at the screen.
But the example you give is very interesting, related to the concept of technique and technology. Because in handwriting, of course, there is already a kind of handicraft involved. I mean, there also kind of technique involved, because you have the pen and the writing itself is technique. So would you say there is a major shift of notion of technique from this kind of technique to technology such as a computer?
Yeah, I mean, with this question, we're actually back at the main field for the question of technology as it is posed or by philosophy, because all started with the question of writing, and philosophy was as such constituted against writing, actually, with Plato, for example, I mean, that's the most important thing for the foundation of philosophy. And in the 19th century, if you
have to explain that. In which way was it against writing?
Yeah, because Plato, there's, I mean, philosophy. The invention of writing was as Derrida said. Plato brought up the pharmacology of writing. He said, on the one hand, writing is, of course, a good technology, like a pharmacon, like I don't know the English word actually. It's a poison and
medicine.
Yeah, and a medicine. So it's good because you can keep records. There is an artificial memory. And it's good against, on the one hand, forgetting, good for bureaucracy and so on. But on the other hand, it brings really oblivion to the people. So it is some kind of it's a poison also. And philosophy was always, since Plato. Afterwards, always on the side of the living memory, means not the artificial memory that came into being by writing culture.
Yeah, at that time, it was Plato's criticism against the sophists.
Exactly. And so, in a way, the writing scene, like Derrida and others, of course, and Havelock and Bernard Stiegler was the last one who made this very explicit. So philosophy was constituted in this writing scene, but against writing and as a forgetting of writing. And then you have in the 19th century...
And as against technique.
Yeah, and against technique, because writing seemed to be the first technique, kind of prothesis, of course. Yes. And in the 19th century, when the typewriter came up, you have again the discussion about handwriting then and machine writing. For Nietzsche, it was clear that his typewriter was writing together with him the texts. He said, das Schreibzeug schreibt meine Gedanken mit. Ne? Yeah. And Heidegger, for example, he was really opposed machine writing. He says machine writing for him was kind of the beginning of cybernetics already, of the fulfillment of Gestell,
instrumental thinking, basically.
Pardon?
Instrumental thinking.
Yes. And for him, the hand only. He said he was very anthropocentric in a lot of ways. Heidegger also he was very against humanism and argued against humanism. He was anthropocentric. For example, the hand was for him one of the. I mean, only the man, the human has a hand, and language were closely connected for Heidegger, yes. hand and language and poetry. So he had these lines, and art against, if you have another line, technology, machine writing. Cybernetics was the other side of and a dangerous side for thinking. So in a way, if we discuss this question of who writes my text, we are immediately back in this classical scene of philosophy.
Exactly. Yeah. When did this transformation taking place, and in which way were the, let's say, from a philosophical perspective, the treatment of technology with just criticism of instrumental thinking to technology is part of your thinking.
Yeah. That's an interesting. For me personally one of the most interesting
because
issues of the 20th century.
Yes, because in technology you have both terms, techne
Yeah.
and logos
Exactly.
at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. I mean, there was a long, of course, as you said, tradition against instrumental reason, the instrumentalization of the logos and of reason. And what happened in 20th century, I think, is that the evolution of technical objects, to speak with Simondon, made or put us into another age and another regime, which is not understandable anymore in notions or in terms of instrumentality, not anymore a prosthesis of the body. If we talk about writing and handwriting, we have still the idea, okay, the hand, I mean, we think the question of technique as a prosthetical question, as a kind of extension of our hand, and so on and so on. And so as long as we have to do with tools and instruments and simple machines, we can have the idea that all these gadgets or machines or things are extensions of our bodies. And I guess around the middle of 20th century, of course starting earlier with already some kind of networks, but I think this thesis of extension and prosthesis came to an end. Even classical prosthetical thinkers like Gotthard Günther, for example, had this idea already. He was a famous cybernetician, and he said, yeah, there is a jump, and out of technology is not anymore a prosthesis of the body, but he said then of the brain, because we have the neuronal networks, and so the new age of technology is not an extension of the body, but of our brain. In the early age of cybernetics, a lot of thinkers they had the intuition that something changed, but they stick still to the prosthetical thing, you know. Old language. And then, of course, like Marshall McLuhan was it's very famous also for this. He said with the network of telegraphy and so on, the extension of brain study. But I think that after, I mean, now we are 50 years later, and we are confronted with much more than this kind of brain extension, and we have more distance to this interesting scene around 1950, and I would say this is really a shift completely beyond any kind of prosthetical thinking. Yeah. That's what I would call the move from technique to technology.
Yes.
It's not technology is nothing that is thinkable as in a prosthetical way, as an extension. It means related to the human and to the subject as such. It's a completely different relationship.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing would be now then, after this kind of subjective, objective relationship, what comes after it?
Yes.
And this would be necessary then to develop and to describe if we want to know what technology is.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is then the crucial question. How do you describe the relationship between man and the instrument? And because up to this first stage, which you described up to, let's say, mid of 20th century, one could clearly separate the both of them. How would you describe this new relationship? Which is basically based on cybernetic thinking, and perhaps you can a little bit describe, how cybernetic thinking is bringing up these new notions. What is a new cybernetic take on this?
First of all, yes, when we speak about cybernetics, I would also say cybernetics is, on the one hand, we have to say, okay, this is some kind of historical formation, first
Yes.
order, second order cybernetics, as a multi-disciplinary or transdisciplinary culture of science and so on.
Yes.
It has a beginning and an historical end. But I would say, for me, with cybernetics what started was, or has been, the process of cybernetization, which is still going on, and which is still the process determining us.
Yeah. What is the difference between the both? Between the process of cybernetization and cybernetic?
Yeah, I mean, the cybernetics changed the way of thinking. And invented new machines who implemented new culture, I would say, culture of sense or meaning. That's difficult to translate. Sinnkultur, I would say in German. That's always the discussion to say sin, sense, or meaning. So it's a kind of new meaning culture which was completely based on relations. And even I would say today, not only relations, but very complex networks of participations between man and machine, but also other agents, means also animals and plants and so on. And cybernetics was the historical, the science who was important for this move. But then the new machine culture that has been developed and which is still going on today and is developed as we have today multiscalar networks, intelligent environments and so on. They brought us into this complete ecologization of a general ecologization of all spheres we're living in.
But also this dualism you described between man and machine, between man, human beings and objects, is it of course itself historic. I mean, these notions are historical contingent. They developed basically from Descartes on in Western European thinking. So my question would be, is there a relationship between let's say a non-dualistic pre-modern kind of thinking to a cybernetic thinking?
Yeah. I understand what you mean. First of all, I would say, okay, the classical, the modern thinking and the classical dichotomy of subject and object, it's of course modern. This is, for me, one of the important conceptual consequences of the traditional technical situation, man and machine. This is manipulation of nature, handling of objects, and so on. For me, this is an effect of this classical technical arrangement, so to say, or assemblage. And what we have later on, when cybernetics blew up this relation in a non-modern way, we have a lot of cyberneticians and especially also other philosophers like today Bruno Latour, who say, okay, this actually what comes back is a kind of non-modern regime, and which when we study non-modern societies, so-called archaic societies, we find kind of relationalities which are similar to what we find today. I mean, you had in your house here in the HKW the animism exhibition, and this is a classical topic for Felix Guattari, for example, Guattari said we have to develop animistic cartographies of subjectivity to understand our technical world today. So I would say maybe, I mean, okay, it's we non-moderns describing today in a way non-modern, other non-modern society. And the important question is not if all of this is a construction or something. The important thing is that we are, by this we are finding meta-modelizations of our own contemporaneity. And I think that's the interesting point about this comeback of animist thinking.
Now coming back to this new relationship between man and machine, where there are a lot of approaches proposing a new conceptualization, looking at the man-machine relationship as new identities. So where this classical separation between subjects and objects is not anymore there. We described that. Of course, this has a lot of implications for our understanding what humans are. And all our classical notions of intentionality, of responsibility, of also political action. In order to develop a political strategy, one has, let's say, to look at something in order to develop a strategy. So how do you deal with this developing new units which have, of course, then a very different logic in themselves?
I mean, what I'm calling for is actually, because of this move from techniques to technology and the move from a classical, modern subject-object relation to what I called a general ecology, which operates with a whole new field of relationality. I call for a general ecologization of thinking and theory as such. And therefore we have to start to redescribe also the classical fields of this subjectivity, like politics, for example. I mean, when I understand your question also in this direction, and what are the units, the collectives being relevant in this political sphere. So the interesting issue is then to ask, what would an ecologization or the general ecologization where we are in at the moment, and which is our coming principle, I would say, what does this mean for the regime of politics? Who are the agents?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, Latour.
For example, does one have to imagine a parliament where, let's say, the chancellor is a lady and a computer?
Yeah, I mean, this is. I know, and I know what you mean. This is, of course, a classical picture in a way of politics, and we try to redescribe it in a way. You have the same questions, the issues Latour brought up. How do you give a voice to the things? You know, I mean, all this. The problem is that all this is still based. The question as such is still based on the representative model of democracy. Yeah. So you have other developments like take for example Jean-Luc Nancy with his question of être avec, being with, Mitsein, we say in German, mit erscheinen, and he's also looking for a new thinking of collectives and what collectivity means, and this is another way where our political, ecological, eco-political thinking is heading to. I would call the the new frame, if it is a frame, but cosmopolitics in a way, maybe not in the sense of Isabel Stenger's, but this kind of complex politics dealing with these networks of relations. And if you take issues like the climate change, this is maybe the issue of a future cosmopolitics, with where we see today that with the classical arrangements or frames of politics, we don't come along with this question.
But also the classical conception of epistemology, because to understand this process, the basic of it is are big datas, so-called big datas, which are let's say abstractions which nobody of us really understands, and what is taking part is to having this translated then in images again, which people can read, but of course the images are themselves already the end process of abstraction processes nobody understands, only the machines. So for me it's difficult to understand on which basis then we can take decisions at all. And on this scale, I mean, it basically is a question of scaling. Because if you and controlling processes on such a global level.
I think that what you are describing is of course correct, but the thing is that the climate simulations and big data sciences, what they expose is something that is constitutive for technosciences since the last century.
Yes.
The thing is, what we learn today, that what we have to accept is, or a lot of us have to accept is, that it was an illusion that to think that science could be a kind of direct representation of the world or certain issues or problems, or
but taking that into account, the real let's say conceptual challenge is so the science process in itself is not the answer to our problems, and how do we repoliticize then this on the basis of the concepts we are just discussing?
I mean, today you have the politicians, and in a way they are calling just the scientists for just for proofs, or I don't know for what they need.
We have an expert culture we are relying on, which is far beyond the political process. And how can we repoliticize this expert culture? I think it's a major issue.
That's a major issue. You're right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.